If it's okay with you, I'd love to just start with your journey into having a spiritual experience and being misdiagnosed and your way out.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. No, totally. Well, no, I'm so happy to be able to talk about that in the sense that it changed my life and it almost destroyed my life in the sense that, in the early 80s, I was in my early to mid 20s and it was totally a result of trauma, without going into the story. I'm an only child and my father, he was just a very sick man and like so many people, he just acted out his unhealed abuse on the next of kin, which was me. But it was so over the top, the depth of the hatred and rage and shadow projection. And whatever I could say more, but just it made me really sick being so vulnerable and open hearted and sensitive. And then I was in such deep pain from it. The suffering was so overwhelming that I just didn't know what else to do except to go inwards and just to assume the position of the witness. And that was the only thing that was slowly making me feel better. And then after almost a couple of years of doing that, maybe we're talking about 4 hours a day. I mean, it was a very intense time in my life. I had this huge spiritual awakening, which had become catalyzed by getting hit by a bolt of lightning, and that was when I began. It was like something in my inner eye opened or something, and I began to recognize we're having a collective dream, and I began to see the synchronistic matrix that was underlying and informing and connecting everything. And it was so overwhelming. I was so ecstatic of what I was realizing because I was 24, that it immediately freaked people out because I had stepped out of my normal personality structure. And all within, the day I got hospitalized and diagnosed and medicated. And that was the first of maybe three or four other hospitalizations over the next 18 months, and that almost killed me, the abuse from psychiatry, because here I was having a full-blown awakening that wasn't recognized. They were then overlaying this misdiagnosis, telling me at that point, oh, you have this newly discovered chemical imbalance, like bipolar manic depression, which, I mean, God, that and then not only that, but then once I became entangled in the psychiatric community and I began talking about the abuse from my father, they actually aligned with him and protected him and saw, oh, that's just a sign of my mental illness. So it that's what I mean that it almost killed me. But what I began to discover is that the same deeper, darker kind of evil force that was using my father as its personal instrument, he was oblivious. He was just a conduit. He had become so taken over by his own unconscious that he would, in a way, he was my best teacher. Like all I write about now with this mind virus and evil, how I learned about it was, I studied at the feet of a master and my father. But I saw that the same evil force that was coming through the person of my father is now coming through the system of psychiatry. And then I began to realize, oh, it's non-local. It exists all throughout space and time, even transcended to 3D space time, including within me, including within all of us. Because then I began to see, oh my God, that same deeper, darker, evil force is informing and giving shape to the greater body politic and all of the madness and evil that's playing out all over the world. And that's when I began to realize, oh my God, I've like tapped into something that every spiritual wisdom tradition is pointing at. And I began to realize that seeing the what I call the deeper dream, the synchronistic matrix is another word for it, that's sort of arranging everything and coordinating everything and giving shape and form to everything. that seeing that involves stepping out of identifying in this way we've been all conditioned, in other words, from the separate self, and seeing, oh my God, there's a deeper non-local field that we're all contained within and expressions of and co-creating with. And that's where, you know, typically when people have spiritual awakenings, everything is imbued with a sense of meaning and everything seems symbolic and mythic and synchronistic. And yeah, that's what I began to tap into. But it can also be a bit much if you're not integrated. You know, then you see everything is speaking to you, which it is, but it's easy. It's what I call OSS, over synchronicity stimulation, where, you know, yeah, instead of being in balance, you're imputing meaning to everything in a way that's a little bit out of balance, and that can be pathological. So basically, without, I can go on, but that was unbelievably traumatic, the psychiatric stuff. The last hospital was in 82. I haven't been on medication for like 40 years, and they guaranteed if I went off medication that I would have a psychotic break. And meanwhile, you know, I just knew, I never bought into their diagnosis for one iota of a second, because I knew inwardly it was made so clear to me I was having an awakening, because it was just based on my own experience. And I was realizing, wow, this is a collective dream. That's an oracle. It's speaking symbolically like a dream. And that this is, everything is synchronistically interconnected with each other. And the more and more I connected with that, the more I actually was connecting with myself, with my true nature, as if I was snapping out of the conditioned program self, of the separate self, of linear, you know, time. And anyway, so that's just a little bit of an intro into, so I don't have the normal background of, oh, I went to graduate school and got a PhD and I'm certified in this way. No, the only thing I'm certified, I joke with my friends, is that I'm certifiably out of my conceptual mind. And I'm very happy about that. I mean, it's a great tool, but I'm not identified with it.
Wow, I am just so amazed with the inner strength and courage it must have taken to follow that inner voice and not internalize those labels from the system. And
Yeah.
you know,
And
especially a system.
I just want to say about that, you know, I appreciate that, but from my point of view, it doesn't feel like any inner strength or courage, because I didn't have a choice. You know, at that point, if I would have subscribed to like the psychiatric version of who I was, you know, and oh, I would have like, oh, yes, I'm mentally ill. Oh, yes, I'll have this illness for the rest of my life. Oh, yes, I have to take medication. It would have killed me. It would have, you know, I probably would have committed suicide years ago. And then from their point of view, they would have been another successful treatment, a compliant patient, where they saw me as like this uncompliant patient who was just a troublemaker because I wasn't agreeing to their diagnosis, you know. But the thing that saved me was my inner experience. I knew it could not have been made more clear to me that I was having a spiritual awakening. And here are these like external people, the psychiatrists, telling me that they knew more about the experience I was having than I did, but I was the one having my experience and they had no idea.
I don't know if you've read it. It's called The Manufacture of Madness by Thomas Sayers.
Yeah.
Sayers, yeah.
Totally. Yeah.
Oh,
Oh, yeah. That's a classic book. Yeah.
so amazing. And just I think of how much harm has been done through this repetition of scapegoating, you know, maybe the most sensitive, insightful individual in the family. And then, yeah, the system coming in and further taking away
Yep.
individual rights, willpower. You know, these labels are just so harmful. So, and part of
Right.
my mission is to shift, you know, norms around mental illness and acknowledge these experiences as legitimate spiritual experiences. I mean, how just how crazy that we label, you know, an amazing experience like what you had as psychotic or, you know,
Right.
but there are historical roots that go back. And your books really get into that with this idea of Wetiko. And I'm also interested in, yeah, your journey in towards reading about Carl Jung, Native American spirituality, and how that's influenced you too.
Yeah. Well. So when I got out of the last hospital in '82, my entire universe was telling me, "Oh, you're mentally ill and you're in denial of your illness." And I knew, that wasn't true, but I knew I had to figure out like what the hell's happening to me, like because I had no context in mainstream medicine. And so that's when I connected, with my teachers, these great Tibetan lamas, with the work of Jung, with alchemy, with shamanism, and I began more and more to understand, oh, this is like kind of this transpersonal, impersonal process where people who are being called, to be some sort of, to like really connect with themselves and be some sort of healer or teacher or, shaman, or because the shaman is really the wounded healer. I don't identify myself as a shaman at all. I just think, no, I'm a wounded healer, because for years I would be like, oh, I have to get rid of this incredible wound as a result of the abuse from my father. And then after, 20, 30 years, I began to realize, what if it never goes away? And I began to carry it in a way where it becomes the portal to my creative gifts. And so, I'm deeply in touch with just feeling, wounded and traumatized, but I don't identify with that. Like I'm saying, I'm carrying it in a way where it connects me with my work. And that's where and why and how I'm able to write these books that are helping people all over the world, because it's come out of my own experience. And yeah, so finding, like when I found the work of Jung that really helped me, in his autobiography, he talks about confrontation with the unconscious. And that all of a sudden he began having these dialogues with these imaginal figures that existed in his psyche that were clearly part of him, but were not him. They knew stuff that he didn't know, and they were teaching him. And of course, thank God, he could easily have gotten diagnosed as being schizophrenic. Oh, he's hearing voices. But no, he discovered the reality of the psyche, which he then pointed out was the greatest discovery of the 20th century in the realm of psychology. And most people haven't even heard about it, that the psyche exists in its own, that it has a reality in and of itself, that it's not just objective in the way we've been trained to think of something being objective. It's not just subjective in that it's just our imagination and projection. There's an intermediate realm that couples the subjective and the objective. And that's also with quantum physics. That's why I wrote a book about quantum physics. And, and here's Jung, who had tapped into this, because his whole work was basically trying to connect us with our inner guide. We all have this, whether you call it our muse, our angel, our daimon, or a genius, and that's where the real healing takes place, where you connect with something in yourself that is yourself, that's greater than yourself. He called it the self, and it has to do with our wholeness, with our nature, with our Buddha nature, or Christ. A lot of different names for it. Doesn't make a difference what name. And that's what I had begun to connect with. And right away, I was getting pathologized for it. And thank God I didn't, buy into that. If I would have, it would have killed me. But the tragedy is that so many people who are connecting with their deeper self, and of course you can't, it's so overwhelming, you're not able to integrate it. They might be acting a little weird or step out of their normal identity pattern. And then what, psychiatry is trained to do is pathologize. And it's like putting the person under a spell, because the person is so open and vulnerable. When authority figures are like telling you you're sick, it actually can, in a way, create the sickness or make it more probable that you'll identify with being sick. And then as soon as you do that, then they have all the evidence confirming their diagnosis. And it's a self-reinforcing feedback loop.